Part 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is objectively the best installment to the series. Subjectively. And in my eternal quest to completely ruin my most beloved franchises for myself, I want to talk about the most major and glaring issue that this absolutely perfect part has. Rohan Kishibe's stand, Heaven's Door, breaks every single mechanic of JoJo's. Every single cog that makes this magnificent anime spin is completely broken by the stupid little self-insert twink and his terrible power. But slow your horses, kids. Before we get to that, we have to understand what makes this part, and really all of JoJo's, so good in the first place. Due to the very nature of how JoJo's works thematically as a periodic anime, it gives the author a very special opportunity to completely change how each installment works, an opportunity which author Hirohiko Araki takes full and complete advantage of. And when I say full and complete, I mean it. Every single part of JoJo's is so incredibly different. So different that it'll either be completely opposite to the last installment just for the sake of it, or have you genuinely questioning why Araki would decide to go down that road and still would have you hooked within the first 3 episodes. Every single part in JoJo's does this except for part 1, which of course introduces the story and can't do anything because there's nothing to jump off of yet. Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, however, is where this aspect of the show is cooked to absolute perfection. I want you to think back to every part before part 4. They all build upon previous parts, sure, but if you think about it, the trying to be different that they're doing is to make up for previous flaws, instead of just focusing on the being different for the sake of a novel story. Part 2 tries to continue the vampire storyline, but this time with a much less boring main character and better fight scenes. Part 3 realizes that the Hamon power system is much too boring, and introduces stands as the show's new power system to compensate. And then we get to Part 4. Part 4 is where the show truly embraces its weirdness. Stands have already been introduced and are a staple of the show, and honestly are amplified in terms of quality and creativity. We have completely insane yet interesting characters that don't feel as forced as some of the earlier parts. But more than all else, the biggest change that this part makes is not one that is trying to fix or make up for previous mistakes. It's a change that was created after Araki asked himself, what if instead of trying so hard to fix my past shortcomings, I threw everything I know out of the window and tried to think of my story from a completely different angle? Every single part up until this point not only had some overarching goal within the first 5 or so episodes, but had characters running around all over the place, completing side quest after side quest to physically get to that goal. Part 4 completely turns this on its head by having the entire story take place in the small town of Morio. And even more so, the show doesn't even introduce the main overarching villain until over halfway through the part. Literally just starting off at its base, with no characters even introduced yet, this part already feels special. For all the reasons I listed and then all the ones that I haven't, there is one word that always wells up in my mind when someone asks me how I would describe Part 4 of JoJo's, which is something people totally do to me all the time. That word is confidence. Part 4 has some extremely stupid aspects that somehow work flawlessly with creating the mystique and charm of Morio. We got aliens, we got ghosts. The sky's yellow for quite literally no reason. Araki chose this path because it's what he wanted to do, not because he was trying to appeal to his audience or fix a previous mistake. And you can truly see the shine through in this part and all the parts to follow. This part is great on its own, and it's a turning point for the series as a whole. This confidence is of course extended to the mainstay of the entire franchise, the stands. In Part 3, the introduction of stands significantly increases the pizzazz of JoJo's as a whole. The introduction of this power system was so unique for its time, but in my personal professional opinion, a lot of the stands, especially the early ones in Part 3, are a little undercooked. Now before you flame me in the comments, hear me out. Think about the stands at the beginning of Part 3, especially our main character stands. Star Platinum is just about precision and power, I mean until it gets time stopped, but you know, that's a different story. Silver Chariot is just a sword fighter, and don't even get me started on Hermit Purple. The point I'm trying to make is that JoJo's really struggles with the direction of stands in Part 3, and even more so at the start, where every stand is essentially default stand, but it has some really crazy stat, like speed, flexibility, or precision. This makes a lot of the earlier fights a touch less interesting when compared to the later stands in Part 3, and especially the super creative stands in Part 4. The greatest example of this struggle in my opinion being Hermit Purple. This stand starts out with one very niche ability. Joseph Joestar is able to punch and destroy a camera and have a photo come out depicting something in the real world that's far away. As the story of Part 3 unfolds, however, this stand ability just keeps inexplicably evolving. First, it gains the ability to create a psychic message through a TV, completely without breaking it. And then he later uses it in a stand battle to create a map in the sand of where he needed to go in the fight. We see this pattern of unexplained show mechanics all throughout Part 3. Like when our main Jo Bros are fighting against the lovers, Kakyoin and Polnareff shrink their stands down to go in inside Joseph, and then that shrinking ability is just never used again across all of JoJo's. People will try and explain this off as there's no other circumstance where this shrinking ability is ever needed, but let's be real, it was a lazy device used to push the story forward. There's absolutely nothing wrong with an author experimenting and trying to figure out what direction they want their story and mechanics to go in, which is why I don't want to flame these shortcomings in Part 3 too much. Even today, stands are an extremely unique and novel power system, but back in the 80s or 90s, a power like this was completely unheard of, and after all, art is a process of trial and error. Eventually in Part 3, stands found their footing, and that made for some extremely interesting and technical fight scenes. I think of Death 13 or the Darby Brothers. But this begs the question, what exactly makes some stand designs better than others? What aspects of a stand battle can we point out to understand why some can be better than others? Well, in my opinion, the defining characteristic of a good stand battle is how well it follows one conflict, one that we see all across the series. JoJo's rule of creativity versus choice restriction. The thing that stand battles in JoJo's are most known for is their ability to put main characters in an exceedingly bad scenario, one that the average person couldn't survive, and having the main characters come up with some insane unforeseen solution. Almost every JoJo fight follows this certain flow of enemies cutting off options, and characters coming up with creative ways to think outside the box to get out of these predicaments. One of the main ways JoJo's likes to achieve this aspect of stand battles is to have many enemies that can apply status effects and enforce strict rules with their abilities. Your main characters can't shine creatively without having some kind of problem to solve, and JoJo's creates these problems by having enemy stand users that can create some kind of limitation. Seriously, think about almost any enemy stand user that we see. Almost all of them apply some kind of status effect or enforce some kind of rule. Just to name a few, the Darby Brothers, who force people to play games by turning their friends into dolls or chips and creating the desire to save them, or Kobayashi's lock, which after creating a sense of guilt in his foes, allows him to manifest a physical lock in their chest until they've given him enough, usually monetary compensation, to have that feeling go away. Or Talking Head, which makes anyone the stand is attached to say the exact opposite of what they're intending, creating confusion and communication errors. After all, having a stand battle that is just a bunch of punches being thrown would get exceedingly boring after a while, and it's because of these rule sets and limitations imposed on our main characters that they even have the opportunity to do anything with their creativity. Of course, there's still the occasional battle even in the more recent installments of JoJo's that are more based on physicality. But it's funny how with all of these buff characters steeped in strength and willpower, a lot of the advantages that are created are completely due to a character's creativity, and side note, it's because of this rule that every Joestar is given a very open-ended stand. Stands that usually have the opportunity to do so much more than they first let on. This aspect of stand battles is definitely improved upon towards the end of Part 3, but it doesn't become the main draw of fights until Part 4. Nearly every enemy stand in Part 4 follows this convention. Let's take a look at one of the most interesting ones in my opinion, an extremely underrated fight, Josuke vs. Highway Star. This long-range stand's preface is this: if you aren't moving above 60 kilometers per hour, you will have all of the nutrients sucked out of you and you will die. Just due to the rules of the stand, the fight already has an interesting premise. Compare this to a fight like the Joe Bros of Part 3 versus Tower of Grey. That fight relies heavily on what actually happens in the fight, which is very important to any stand battle, but this one is severely weakened without that opening hook. All Tower of Grey has going for it is that it's fast. Highway Star immediately piques your interest, just with the stand's ability. Due to the 60 km/h rule, Josuke has to hop on a motorcycle and ride around Morio while trying to get help and collect any information on the stand user that he can. And while doing so, and because this fight is already set up with a good premise, Josuke's creativity in stand is given many opportunities to shine, which it absolutely does. One of the most memorable moments in JoJo's for me is watching Josuke dismantle his own motorcycle and rebuild it in midair to avoid hitting a baby. There are many more extremely creative moments in this fight, but this is the point I'm trying to get at. Part 4 stands, much like many other aspects of the part, are where the confidence and absurdity of JoJo's starts to really shine. Diamond. Whatever, put me all. Every time I watched Part 4 of JoJo's, however, there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my head that something wasn't right. A feeling that became a screaming voice before long. Rohan Kishibe and his stand Heaven's Door are a pronounced step in the wrong direction, and it pains me so very much to see such a high quality installment to the series weighed down by this one bumbling idiot. If you've enjoyed the video so far and you plan on continuing to enjoy the video, please consider subscribing so I can beat the Spanish Sonido with the Sonic profile picture. Every single day we get closer and closer, and when we do beat him, there will be a party and there will be ice cream cake, so get hype. Thank you for watching until this point, and back to the video. Heaven's Door is not just ridiculously overpowered, it breaks every single rule that holds JoJo's Bizarre Adventure together, while simultaneously tapping into the issues JoJo's previously had with stand abilities. In my observation, any discrepancies people have with JoJo's are often explained away by fans in any way that they can, like how the stand shrinking thing from part 3 is so obviously a lazy writing tactic. But Heaven's Door is one of the only things in JoJo's that, when debated upon, has people genuinely going, I don't really know. I'm sure 99% of you already know what the stand does, but I'll give a brief rundown just in case. Rohan and his stand are introduced in episode 14 of Diamond is Unbreakable, titled Let's Go to the Manga Artist's House. When Koichi and Hazamada find out that the famous manga artist Rohan Kishibe actually lives in Morio, they go to his residence. They speak with him and are eventually able to get a tour of his house, and while Rohan is away in the other room, they sneak a peek at Rohan's new manuscript to his manga. Now pay attention, because this is where things can get confusing. In its current state, Heaven's Door doesn't have a physical stand that manifests, and instead of being a lot like stands which activate their ability through physical attacks, Heaven's Door only activates after Koichi and Hazamada appreciate Rohan's art. After they do so, parts of their bodies open up like books, and Rohan is freely able to see and alter their memories. He can also write new rules which forces the victim to obey them. Now, even just out of the gate, this stand is quite overpowered. All Rohan would have to do is write something like, "You will immediately go and end your life," and any fight would be over. But in the state it's in right now, it still has a limitation. That being, in order to use Heaven's Door, someone has to look at and comprehend Rohan's art. We've seen some pretty overpowered stand abilities that apply status effects before. I think of a stand like Bastet, which creates an increasingly powerful magnetic force around anyone who touches its electrical outlet. This stand is very similar in the sense that it applies an overpowered status effect provided the right conditions are met. So far, this is nothing we haven't seen in JoJo's before. And following the convention I spoke on before of creativity versus choice restriction, Josuke is able to work around this activation by keeping his eyes closed. The only nitpick I actually have with the introduction of Heaven's Door is surprisingly something Josuke does. When Josuke has his eyes closed, Rohan tries to get him to open them by insulting his hair. When Josuke falls for this and opens his eyes, he isn't affected by Heaven's Door. This is explained to be the case because Josuke was so mad that his brain couldn't process what was actually being shown to him, and in his rage, he's able to defeat Rohan. While I'm fine with the whole blind rage workaround, I think the reasoning behind why it happened is inherently flawed in terms of what JoJo's prides itself in. Josuke was able to beat Rohan here due to random chance. Of course, there is a possibility that he could have done it with his eyes closed, but Rohan using his ability to gain information to intentionally make him mad so he would open his eyes was very creative on his part. Now, had Josuke baited Rohan into insulting his hair or just continued to fight with his eyes closed, I think the ending of this fight would have been much more satisfying. But small nitpicks aside, this introduction to Heaven's Door isn't half bad. It's inherently a very interesting stand ability, and it even has a main limitation that we see our main characters work around. That is until literally 2 episodes after this arc, where things immediately start to go off the rails. Episode 17, Rohan Kishibe's Adventure, is his next appearance in this part. Rohan and Koichi are in the ghost alleyway when they meet Reimi. Rohan uses his stand to read her memories and write a command saying that she couldn't harm them. But this time, Rohan summons an actual physical manifestation of his stand, which is never explained, he just does it. This completely breaks the limitation set just 2 episodes prior. Reimi never looks at any of Rohan's work, and all Rohan has to do is touch her in order to turn her into a book. Someone might make the argument that Rohan drawing lines in the air to manifest his stand counts as someone viewing his work. But this can be disregarded because we see him manifest and use his stand without drawing these lines later on. So what's going on here? Then at the end of the episode, Koichi is tricked by the ghost alleyway and turns around. As he's being taken away, Rohan once again physically manifests his stand, but what he uses it for this time also mysteriously pushes the limits of what his stand was shown to do previously. In order to save Koichi from the alleyway ghost hands, he literally just writes on Koichi, "I will not be able to see." Now this completely changes what Rohan's stand is and its level of overpoweredness. Is that a word? Whatever, I don't care. We knew before that he could manipulate memories and force others into acting in any way he so chose. But this is a different story entirely. This episode depicts him making a physical change to Koichi. Reading and altering memories and enforcing actions have absolutely no effect on physical things. Also, it isn't shown here, but in the manga, Rohan specifically writes, "You can't see anything and you're launched forward." There's some small argument that can be made about blindness being a thing Rohan could theoretically manipulate given his stand's toolkit, but launching someone is absolutely a matter of physicality and has nothing to do with anything mental. I'm trying to keep this video about the anime only, but don't worry, this isn't the last time we see Rohan manipulating reality in this way, but more on that soon. Rohan has been in JoJo's for a total of 3 episodes, and he's already going back towards that old issue JoJo's had with inconsistent show mechanics. Him gaining the ability to manifest his stand is something I could look past if that were the only issue. The next time we see Rohan's ability used is in the fight against the rock, paper, scissors kid, and this is where things start to get really stupid. In this fight, Rohan defeats the Jonkin boy by using Heaven's Door on the invisible baby and writing becomes invisible and makes Jonkin boy play rock. So first of all, this once again pushes Rohan's limitations by allowing him to affect stands themselves with Heaven's Door. There was never a time before when Rohan ever uses his ability on another stand. And while one could argue that this is something that he learned to do recently since he's only ever fought 2 battles using his ability before this one, my gripe isn't how confident he is in being able to do this, and that they never explained before that he's able to affect stands with his ability. Another issue is with the second part of the command that he writes on the invisible baby. Makes Jonkin boy play rock. There's 2 possibilities of how this happened, and both make no sense. Either the baby was able to physically close Jonkin boy's fingers, or the baby just being in contact with his hand somehow made the command work on him. With the former, the baby is not only somehow strong enough to be able to do this, but we also hear a pretty nasty cracking sound as his fingers are forced down, almost like they're breaking or his joints are popping.
Wait, what's going on? What?
With the latter, being able to have humans enact Heaven's Door instructions by proxy would be extremely overpowered. For example, Rohan would be able to write something like, try and touch anyone that you see. When you touch them, they will end their lives in 24 hours, and they will also try to touch anyone they see and spread this instruction, essentially making a virus. I don't think he would ever do this, but if this option is what his stand did here, then he could. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and pick the first option, even though it makes no sense that the baby was able to force Jonkin boy's fingers down. Finally, the last issue this fight has comes right at the end, when after Rohan defeats Jonkin boy, he says this.
I'm going to write, as long as I live, I shall lose it, Rochambeau, and my stand shall be no more.
And then not long after, says this.
You won't die. I'm simply going to wipe your stand out of existence.
No!
Now, he doesn't end up going through with this plan, but he seems extremely confident in his ability to literally just destroy Jonkin boy's stand. But more interestingly, he says that he will do so without killing Jonkin boy. We've been shown before how a stand is a manifestation of your spirit or your soul, and so any damage taken by your stand is reflected onto the user. He doesn't even just seem confident anymore, he seems to know for a fact that him being able to destroy his stand is in the realm of possibility. Removing his ability to play rock, paper, scissors would be fine, and it would also achieve the same goal. But no, he literally says he's going to destroy his stand. If this were true, which it seems like it is, then that would mean that Rohan is literally rewriting the rules of the series itself. Once you're a stand user, there's no going back. Your spirit will be able to be physically manifested until the day you die. And the only outcome that could come from destroying a stand is destroying the user too. This is where Rohan starts to dip into reality warping. The final fight that is important to talk to before we dive into other topics about Rohan is one I've mentioned before. Highway Star versus Josuke. Rohan plays a very minor role in this fight, but what he does also has one of the biggest impacts on what a stand is capable of. Rohan sees the weird room on the tunnel wall when he's riding on the bus with Josuke and decides to go back and investigate. He realizes a little too late that the room is a trap, and he is attacked by Highway Star. He uses Heaven's Door to get information on the stand and finds out that it will follow anyone anywhere, but only at a top speed of 60 kilometers an hour. Josuke comes in the room against Rohan's request and gets himself caught by the stand. And in order to save him, Rohan writes these exact words on Josuke. Your body will blast away at 70 kilometers an hour, which of course works because it's Rohan. Luckily, he doesn't terrorize the rest of the fight with his terrible writing, but what he does here is important. Unlike the time he blasts Koichi back in the alleyway, this moment is formally present in both the anime and manga. But also, this once again has nothing to do with anything mental. And once again giving Rohan the absolute best case scenario, we can assume that the Koichi blindness thing did have some mental related aspect to it that allowed it to happen. And we could say that Koichi getting blown back was only in the manga and not the anime. But not only is this moment present in both, but it's also much more specific and powerful than the supposed time with Koichi. This is absolutely a matter of physicality and where Rohan fully becomes a reality warper. Kind of. Now that all the fights are out of the way, I want to talk about counter arguments people have to some of the points I made here, and why they're all biased towards JoJo's. I know JoJo's is peak, and I'd like to be biased too, this is my favorite part, but there's too much being broken about the show here to ignore. Starting with my last point about Rohan kind of becoming a reality warper after the Highway Star fight, some people have explained that Rohan was able to do this because he can make anything happen that is theoretically possible. Ignoring that it's never explained that Rohan is able to directly affect anything physically until he just does it randomly here, I can see where people are coming from with this stance. The way I see it is like a much more overpowered version of the limitation on the stand Weather Report. Weather Report is a stand that can replicate any naturally occurring weather phenomena. This ranges from doing something as simple as creating rain to being able to summon extremely rare phenomena such as when he summons a rainstorm of poison dart frogs. He's able to do this because on very rare occasions, frogs and other small animals can rain from the sky after being picked up by heavy winds. Yes, in real life too. Look it up, it's kind of crazy. But this argument does almost nothing for defending Rohan's lazy writing. Firstly, the only thing this argument changes in terms of how powerful Rohan is that now he just can't do things that are physically impossible. This then raises the question of what is actually physically impossible. When we see Josuke fly back, he's not being enacted upon by any external force which violates the laws of physics. I saw someone specifically explain this by saying Josuke theoretically could have used his stand to punch the ground and propel himself backwards. But Josuke doesn't do that. And so with that argument, he could have also theoretically done a lot of things in this situation. He could have been seated on a rocket-propelled vehicle and moved much, much faster. The only thing physically impossible I can think of off the top of my head is something like Josuke will move faster than the speed of light. It is widely regarded that the speed of light is the limit of how fast something can travel in the universe. But what about things that we haven't figured out how to do yet as a society? We know things can move as fast as the speed of light, so if Rohan wrote, Josuke will fly back at the speed of light, then what would happen? If he doesn't fly back at light speed, then it either means that we will never be able to travel that fast, or there's some invisible limit to how powerful Rohan can be. If he does fly back at light speed, then that means Rohan is pretty much able to do anything as long as he tests out the command to check if it's theoretically possible. Even with this weak argument and giving Rohan the benefit of the doubt, he's still extremely overpowered. And either way, he is still at the top of the series in terms of how powerful he is, with an incomparable gap between him and even the most powerful stands or characters in the show. Even with all the hoops people are jumping through to try and make this make sense, which it doesn't, all of their arguments don't even take into account the time when he was seconds away from actually breaking the laws of the show, when he fully intended to destroy someone else's stand without killing the user. So once again, let's act like none of that is true, and even though we are never told or ever shown, let's assume that Rohan has some invisible power limit, which would be lazy writing anyway, but we're trying to give Rohan the best possible scenario here. Rohan is still extremely overpowered. And speaking of being overpowered, another argument I've seen is people saying that there are many, many other stands that are somewhat kind of comparable to Heaven's Door's power level. But all of those stands that people are talking about, ones like Gold Experience Requiem, Made in Heaven, or King Crimson, are either achieved through some sort of stand upgrade or are related to a villain or main character, which are known to be chosen by fate to receive these very overpowered abilities. Rohan does none of these things. He doesn't do anything to get a stand upgrade, he isn't a part of some powerful bloodline like the Joestars or the Dio bloodline, he is literally just a side character who lives in this small, crazy, noisy, bizarre town. Do you see how you probably feel confused right now?
What?
Do you see how me trying my absolute best to justify Heaven's Door resulted in so many unanswered questions and me having to power scale? The reason it feels this way is because Rohan and Heaven's Door are just badly written. At every single step of the way, Rohan is given new abilities without any explanation. The old limitations he once had are removed without so much as a sentence regarding where they went. People try and come up with argument after argument as to why he makes sense, and they all fall flat because he just doesn't have any limitations set on him. I haven't even talked about Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, or the time he just teaches Koichi how to understand Italian in part 5, because whenever I tried to fit them into my already existing points about Heaven's Door, it felt like my brain was going to give out on me due to heat exhaustion. I could go on and on with more smaller nitpicks that I decided to leave out of this video, but all the roads lead back to Rome. Heaven's Door is a mistake. It creates so many questions that the series never has any answers to, and more than anything else, its existence breaks everything about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Thank you so much for watching until this point. Also, I just wanted to announce I just launched my Patreon. There's not too much over there just yet, but if you would like to support the channel even further than you already have by watching until the end, you can get some cool things over there like video shoutouts at the end of every single one of my videos, sneak peeks into what I'm working on, and priority reply to any comments you may have. So if that's something you'd be interested in, the link is in the description. As always, I've been Sunito, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing.